The fastest way to discredit a black developer in a tech company is not to call her incompetent. It is to reject her fix with just enough jargon to make arrogance sound technical. Say the patch is too risky, say it is inelegant, say it introduces complexity, say it is not production-minded, say she does not understand the architecture at scale. Then, when the system keeps failing, stand there with your senior title and act like her code was the danger while yours was the standard. Zora Bennett had been in software long enough to know that code reviews were never only about code. Not in certain rooms, not under certain managers, not when a black woman kept finding the bug before the people who had been trusted more expensively. So when tech lead Nathan Mercer rejected her patch in front of the whole incident channel and wrote, "This feels like a junior workaround, not a real systems fix," Zora did not argue immediately. She just looked at the crash log scrolling down her second monitor and thought, "In about an hour, your stack trace is going to walk straight back to your own commit." Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories about dignity, exposure, and moments when the receipts compile, clean, subscribe, and stay with me. The company was called North Forge, Cloud Infrastructure, Workflow Automation, Predictive Enterprise Tooling. The kind of software firm that described itself as moving fast and solving hard problems while secretly running on overworked engineers, expensive optimism, and production habits. One outage away from a postmortem nobody wanted to write honestly. They occupied 4 polished floors in a downtown tower and a larger space inside the internet where their brand voice suggested calm mastery, deep systems thinking, and operational excellence. Inside engineering, things were messier. Deploy pressure, feature debt, Slack pings at 11:40 p.m., a culture that praised ownership until ownership made somebody higher up look slow. Zora Bennett was a senior back-end developer on the orchestration platform team, 33, black. Sharp enough to hear broken logic in a planning meeting before the diagram was even finished. Not loud, not performative, just relentlessly exact. She had come up through scholarship programs, contract work, a startup collapse, another startup acquisition, and then North Forge, where she had gained the sort of reputation that always split people cleanly into 2 camps. The competent trusted her instantly. The insecure resented how often she was right before they were ready. She worked in distributed processing and queue stability, which meant her days were mostly spent inside the hidden organs of the company's product, the parts clients never saw until they failed, and everybody suddenly remembered back-end engineers by first name. She liked that. Machines were often easier than people. Logs were honest. Race conditions did not care who had the bigger title. A memory leak did not smile while underestimating you. Nathan Mercer did. White, 39, senior tech lead, good resume, better self-regard. The kind of man who used architectural language the way some people use cologne, too much and mostly to cover fear. Nathan was not stupid. That was important. Men like him rarely are. He was worse in a more common corporate way. He was good enough to get power and insecure enough to feel threatened by anyone who made his judgment look less final. He liked to frame himself as the guardian of code quality, standards, system integrity, long-term maintainability. What that often meant in practice was, my ideas are architecture, your ideas are patches, especially if you are a black woman younger than me, and the room has not yet learned to hear authority in your voice without translation. The outage started on a Tuesday afternoon. North Forge's enterprise workflow engine handled approval chains, sync jobs, scheduled automations, and cross-platform triggers for a range of large clients. At 2:07 p.m., the orchestration queue began slowing. By 2:14, processing latency had tripled. By 2:19, retries started piling up. At 2:23, one major client's automated financial approvals began timing out. By 2:31, incident response had opened a critical severity channel, and half the engineering floor had moved from ordinary stress into expensive stress. Zora joined the incident thread from her desk before the formal call even started. She looked at the queue metrics, worker utilization, retry storm behavior, thread pool exhaustion, garbage collection spikes, then the crash signatures. Interesting, very interesting. The failure pattern was not random. It clustered around a recently deployed scheduling optimization. A service layer change introduced the previous evening to improve throughput during large batch windows. The author of that deployment was Nathan Mercer. Of course, he had shipped it after winning an internal debate 3 days earlier about whether the scheduler should keep smarter context in memory between job handoffs to avoid redundant retrieval calls. Zora had warned, politely and with diagrams, that his caching approach could create object retention issues under burst load if cleanup boundaries were not explicit. Nathan had called that concern overly defensive engineering. The deploy went through anyway. Now the service was burning alive in production. Zora pulled the latest traces and started walking backward from the crashes. Heap growth, retained references, deferred cleanup under chained retry conditions. Under normal traffic, the bug stayed mostly hidden. Under spike load, it metastasized. She knew the shape of the fix in under 15 minutes. Not a total rewrite. Not elegant in the academic sense. Practical, scoped, safe under pressure. Add a cleanup hook on failed job handoff. Reset retained context object after downstream acknowledgement. Guard retry recursion. Temporarily disable one optimization path until a cleaner architecture pass could be done later. A patch, a good patch. The kind you use when production is on fire and the house does not need a lecture about design purity before somebody turns on the water. She wrote it, tested it locally against replay conditions, and pushed it to the emergency review branch. At 2:56, she dropped the link into the incident channel with a note: likely retention leak in scheduler context cache under retry burst. Patch adds explicit teardown plus retry guard. Reproduced crash locally, patch clears replay. People responded quickly. One staff engineer said, "Looking." Site reliability lead: "If this reproduces clean, we may have our stopgap." Another back-end dev: "Nice catch." Then Nathan entered the thread. You could almost feel the room shift through text. He reviewed the diff for less than 4 minutes. Not enough. Nowhere near enough. Then he wrote, "I'm rejecting this for now. This feels like a junior workaround, not a real systems fix. We should avoid piling reactive state logic into the scheduler core." There it was, public, patronizing, technically dressed, exactly on brand. The incident channel went quiet in the way Slack quiets when people are reading something ugly and deciding how much courage they have today. Zora looked at the message once, then again. Junior workaround. Interesting choice from a man whose own code was currently lighting the queue on fire. She replied carefully, "It is a controlled mitigation for a production crash. We can redesign after stability returns." Nathan answered almost immediately, "The crash vector is not proven. Let's not introduce more risk chasing a theory." No, the theory had been proven. He just did not like who had proved it. The SRE lead, Priya Nandakumar, finally spoke. "Can someone confirm repro against the current build? We need to move." Good. Because Priya was one of the few people in the company who treated outages like physics instead of politics. Zora had already done more than confirm. She had isolated. But Nathan's title was still doing its little dance in the room, making people slower than they should have been. Nathan wrote, "I'm spinning on a cleaner rollback-compatible approach." Of course he was. Not because clean mattered most, because control did. Meanwhile, the queue kept worsening. Clients kept failing. The crash loop kept eating workers. At 3:08, one of the largest enterprise tenants escalated through customer success. At 3:12, the VP of engineering joined the channel. At 3:15, a second client reported approval chain deadlock. And still Nathan had no patch ready. Zora stopped watching the argument and returned to the logs. If he would not allow the fix by judgment, perhaps the system would force it by shame. She opened the crash dump viewer, pulled a wider retention sample, then a call stack, then another. There. The same object chain appeared again and again. Scheduler context job envelope, retry metadata, cached execution. Hint all flowing through the same new optimization layer Nathan had merged Monday night. She ran git blame on the file. No surprise, Nathan Mercer. She pulled the exact commit hash. Then the follow-up review comment where he had dismissed her earlier concern about cleanup life cycle. Then she checked the production symbol map and lined it against the crash log offsets. The stack trace matched his code path exactly, not generally, not philosophically, exactly. She exported the trace with line references. At 3:21, she pasted a new message into the incident channel. Crash vector confirmed. Retained scheduler context objects originate in commit 7FD9E2B, context cache optimization. Stack traces attached. Failure path enters retain execution hints and never tears down under retry loop. My patch addresses that exact path. Then she attached the log extracts. The channel changed instantly. One engineer wrote, "Oh, another. That's direct." Priya: "Can anyone dispute this path?" Nathan did not answer for 48 seconds. In an outage, 48 seconds is forever. Then he wrote, "The trace may be highlighting symptom, not root cause. Still trying. Because that is the thing about certain white men in technical leadership. Even with the code bleeding in front of them, they believe authority should buy them one more round of narrative." Zora posted the replay result next. Repro against current build. Crash in 11 minutes under retry burst. Repro against patched build. Stable through 40 minutes with queue drain recovery. Now there was no honest space left. The VP of Engineering, a Korean-American woman named Mina Park, who rarely typed in incident channels, unless she intended to end the ambiguity, wrote one line, "Ship Zora's patch, now." That was it. No discussion, no more architecture theater, no more junior workaround nonsense. Nathan responded with the text equivalent of swallowing glass. Proceed. Priya deployed the mitigation at 3:29, worker crashes slowed by 3:34, queue drain began by 3:41, the worst client timeout stopped by 3:46. By 4:02, the platform had stabilized enough for support teams to send recovery messaging instead of apology loops. The outage lasted nearly 2 hours, long enough to hurt, not long enough to kill renewals, mostly because Zora's patch existed while Nathan was still busy protecting his pride. At 4:20, engineering leadership called an emergency review in War Room C. Glass walls. Large display, bad air, better coffee than people deserved, the whole platform team. SRE Mina, Nathan, Zora. The crash log was projected on the wall, then the service graph, then the commit history, then the retention trace. And because Mina Park understood leadership in a way Nathan never had, she asked Zora to walk the room through the failure path from the beginning. Not Nathan, her. That mattered. Zora stood by the screen and did exactly that. No performance, no hidden anger, just sequence. Scheduler cache optimization introduced Monday. Cleanup boundary omitted in retry path. Retained objects accumulate under burst load. Memory pressure rises. Workers destabilize. Timeout cascade follows. Patch adds explicit teardown and retry guard. System recovers. She clicked to the crash log. The keyframes lit up on the wall, red, layered, damning. Then she clicked to the call trace and the file mapping. Line by line, the crash log traced back to Nathan's own code. Everyone in the room could see it, not vaguely, not as shared team complexity. His code, his commit, his review comments, his decision. Mina asked, "Anything to add, Nathan?" He looked at the wall too long before answering, "I should have approved the mitigation sooner." No, that was not all. Zora did not say it. She didn't need to. The room already knew. Priya, who had less patience than almost anyone with titles during preventable incidents, said, "You also rejected the correct fix publicly while the platform was still failing." That landed hard. Nathan said nothing. Good. Because silence was finally doing to him what condescension had tried to do to her. Mina turned to Zora. "Your patch bought us stability. Thank you." That should have been ordinary. It wasn't. Not in a room where, 40 minutes earlier, a white tech lead had called her a work junior in front of half the org. Then Mina looked back at Nathan. After this meeting, I want a separate review of why the concern raised before deploy was dismissed. That was even better, because it meant the issue was no longer just the outage. It was the pattern, not just bad code, bad judgment about whose warnings counted. After the meeting, people left in the strange quiet engineers carry after a real incident, half adrenaline, half social recalculation. One staff engineer stopped near Zora and said, "That was clean work." A front-end lead added, "You saved us." Priya said the useful thing. "You should have been trusted before the logs." Yes, she should have. Nathan found her later near the quiet desk bank where she was finally drinking water that had gotten warm in her bottle hours earlier. He stood there with his laptop still open, as if even now he needed some object in hand to feel less exposed. "I owe you an apology," he said. Zora looked at him. For which part? That question did what it always does to people who hoped a generic apology might let them leave with most of themselves intact. He shifted. For rejecting the patch. A pause. For how I described it. Another pause. And for not taking your earlier concerns seriously. Better. Still incomplete. But closer. Zora said, "You called it Junior because I wrote it." His face changed. Not outrage. Recognition he had hoped not to be asked for that much honesty. "That's not—" She cut him off. "That is exactly what happened." He looked away first. Good. Because that was the thing he had been avoiding since Monday. Not whether the code failed. Why her warning had sounded less credible to him before the crash log carried it back in machine language. He finally said, "I thought you were over-indexing on edge cases." Zora almost laughed. "No," she said. "You thought I was overstepping." That landed harder than the technical failure ever could. Because now the code was gone, the deployment was over, the machine was stable again, and what remained was character. Nathan did not argue. Good. Because there are moments when denial becomes too stupid, even for pride. Northforge published the postmortem 4 days later. Officially, it was a scheduler cache retention defect under burst retry conditions. Privately, everyone knew the real headline. Zora caught the failure path. Nathan rejected the fix. The crash log buried him. Her patch saved production. Mina made one important decision in the write-up. Under mitigation ownership, she put, "Primary incident diagnosis and recovery patch, Zora Bennett, not the team, not platform engineering collectively, not some flattened language about cross-functional excellence. Her name, that mattered." Because institutions often love a black woman's labor most once it has saved them and then immediately start trying to dissolve it into group effort. Mina didn't allow that. Nathan kept his title. Men like Nathan usually do, but he lost something more valuable in engineering culture: automatic credibility. People started double-checking him, listening harder when Zora spoke, inviting her into design reviews he had once dominated. And perhaps worst of all from his point of view, treating his certainty as something that might now require evidence. 2 months later, she was promoted to principal engineer. Again, not because the company became just, because after enough people watch a black woman diagnose the fire, write the extinguisher, and then calmly stand there while the crash log points to the man who mocked her, pretending she belongs lower in the room becomes operationally embarrassing. The version most people would tell was simple. A white tech lead rejected the black developer's patch. Then the crash log traced back to his own code. But the truer version was this. A black engineer saw the production failure clearly, wrote the correct mitigation under pressure, and offered it while the system was still burning. A white tech lead heard expertise from the wrong woman, wrapped his insecurity in technical language, and tried to downgrade her fix into a junior mistake. Then the logs came up. The stack traces aligned, the commit history opened, and the same system he trusted more than her judgment walked the whole room straight back to the bug living in his own code. That is what prejudice often looks like in tech. Not always exclusion, sometimes just code review as hierarchy, a little condescension, a delayed approval, A belief that a black woman's correctness needs machine validation before it can outrank a white man's confidence, until the crash log loads, and then suddenly the patch they mocked is the only thing keeping production alive. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe and stay close. There are more stories like this one waiting.